Hey guys, Travis Turner, Brick and Loft Realty. Wanted to go over all the secondary documents that you're going to need anytime you make an offer on a property in Texas and you're representing the buyer. And it also shows you insights on what the seller is going to view. So let's jump in. Okay, now we're going to go into the secondary forms for Texas real estate. So we've already gone through our 1 through 4 in another video. We've already talked about the third-party financing in a separate video. So I'm going to show you some of the secondary documents. This is one that you're typically going to use in your contracts that are not a cash purchase. This is the Addendum Concerning Right to Terminate Due to Lender's Appraisal. You're going to have your property address here at the top and the city it's in. So option 1 is waiver. So the buyer, if you represent the buyer and you represent the seller, this is going to look different to each side. If you represent the buyer, this is saying that the buyer is waiving their right to terminate the contract based on any type of appraisal that comes in, whether if it's low. So let's say you're buying a house for $200,000 and the property appraises for $180,000. There's a $20,000 discrepancy, and the bank will not loan on the $200,000 loan. They're going to loan on $180,000 that it appraised for. So there's a $20,000 gap that the seller either has to come down off the price or the buyer has to make up in cash. So as a waiver, the buyer is saying, hey, instead of no matter what the property appraises for, if it's below the purchase price, then I will make up the difference in cash. The partial waiver is where you can say, if the property is $200,000, we'll put a bottom, we'll put a floor on it of as long as it appraises for more than 190, I'll pay the difference between 190 and $1 all the way up to the $200,000 that we agreed upon. If it appraises for 189,999, then we'll have to renegotiate or I can get my money back. This is also a way to look strong in a contract. Obviously, waiver of the appraisal altogether is probably the strongest option, used mostly if you're trying to negotiate multiple offers and your client really, really wants the property and they've got the cash. Partial waiver is if they want to make a strong stand on a contract, but they don't have a ton of cash and they're a little nervous, the property may not appraise, they can put a floor so they at least know how much max they potentially may pay. And then the additional right to terminate is one of the most common uses of this form. If you're not doing a VA or an FHA loan, because that's already built into the third party, if you watch the third party video, it'll go over that. The additional right to terminate is used for conventional loans. You can also use this on a cash purchase if your client wants to. They'll have to order their own appraisal. So additional right to terminate, number 3, we would put this as the contract length. This way we're covered. That way the appraisal, when it gets in within 30 days after the effective date, the property has to appraise for X amount of dollars. Let's say typically if you use this blank, you're going to put the $200,000 mark. This is our sales price. So if the property appraises below this and then you deliver the copy to the seller that the appraisal is low, you can terminate and you can get the buyer's earnest money back. This is the most protection for your buyer, middle protection, and the least protection for the buyer. If you represent the seller, best case scenario, pretty good scenario, and normal buyer's protected scenario. So this is the Addendum Concerning Right to Terminate Due to Lender's Appraisal. Let's jump back and go over a couple of the other documents because they're pretty easy and pretty quick. So we have the IBS here. This is the information about brokerage services. This is a document that is standard that has to be signed by any client you represent. It's a formality document. You're going to put your broker firm here. So ours is Brick and Loft Realty. You're going to put your license number. If the brokerage has a license number and phone number, you can put that here. This is going to be the assumed name if you have that. You're going to have your licensed supervisor. Ours is Travis Hansen, 668-719 is his license. And then you have my name, my license number, email, and phone number. And then you'll have whoever your client is, only your client for you, sign here and then return to you. That document basically just goes over the relationship. If you represent them as the seller, it says, hey, I represent you as the seller only. If you represent the buyer, it says, hey, I represent you as only the buyer. And anything that we discuss is only for your benefit as the buyer or the seller, whoever you represent. The non-realty items, addendum to the contract. This is a document that you're going to use to negotiate any types of furniture or items that are not affixed to the property that your client wants to stay. You can either agree upon a certain amount of money in this blank. Let's say it's $1,000 and you're getting the fridge, washer, and dryer, and your client wants to present this. You can put that here. If you want to do 0, you can hit the space key, which will turn it green. And then what I do is I put -0-. So for sum of $0 here, and then this blank is where you'll put what items you're going to purchase or you're going to leave. So let's say washer and dryer. Washing, I guess it'd be washing machine, drying machine, however you want to call it. That's probably pretty rudimentary. And then we want the kitchen table. And let's say it's a wood one. You want to be a little bit specific. Wooden kitchen table. In case anything comes up, discrepancy, wooden kitchen table and 6 dining chairs. There's our non-realty. There's the items we're negotiating. We're paying them nothing. If we want to pay them money, or they say, hey, we'll counter back at $500, you can come back in here, put $500. Here's our items, and everybody signs here. And those are items that we'll convey at the end of the contract. We have our last but not least, we'll have our Intermediary Relationship Notice. This is a document that you use if you sell a property in-house with one of your fellow co-agents. So if you represent, let's say my company's Brick and Loft, and I sell a house that is, the seller is represented by another Brick and Loft agent, I'll need this Intermediary Relationship Notice. We're going to send it to, so it's going to be to the seller, so John Doe, and then the buyer 1 and buyer 2, it auto-filled it for me, from, this is going to be Brick and Loft, the brokerage, from Brick and Loft Realty. We're going to put regarding the address here. So here's our 11 Main Street in Lubbock. The date, we're going to put the date that the contract is set. This is basically telling each party that each side of the contract is going to be represented by a Brick and Loft agent. However, each agent is still solely tied to that owner or that buyer, and they only can advise them separately. So they cannot combine information, talk behind the scenes, work against the buyer or against the seller to make a deal happen. So as a selling agent or the listing agent, you can't go to the selling agent or the buyer's agent and say, hey, we'll take $10,000 less than what you offered if you want to get it done, and so forth, unless your client gives you the opportunity to. So you still owe them the full fiduciary responsibility to work with them, whatever you've agreed upon and sign documents for. The broker can appoint licensed associates to work with the owner or the buyer. So let's say that you're working a deal, you have a listing, and a buyer comes unrepresented and tries to buy the property from you. Well, you can represent both sides, but if the seller is uncomfortable with you representing both sides of the contract, you could talk to your broker, who can appoint another agent to work with the buyer, and then you can work with the seller separately, so that way it doesn't get intermingled. If you're not going to appoint it and there's 2 different parties, or they're cool with you doing both, you'll just put will not be appointed, and then everybody signs here at the bottom. And these are the secondary documents that are most commonly used whenever you're purchasing or working a deal that's going to be purchasing a property.